Hello, my name is Luna. And if you had asked me 5 years ago whether I thought I'd ever be standing in the marble lobby of one of the most exclusive skyscrapers in Chicago being told not to embarrass my family, I would have laughed or maybe cried. Hard to say. Because 5 years ago, my own family saw me as the failure, the misfit, the cautionary tale in a family that prided itself on tradition, expectations, and appearances. But on this night, everything was about to change. I stood just inside the lobby of Skyline Tower, its glass chandeliers catching the warm gold of the setting sun. The scent of polished wood and citrus cleaner filled the air, my signature. Actually, I'd chosen every scent, every texture, every square inch of this building, and yet, to my family, I was just another guest, an outsider they barely tolerated. The occasion, my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. A black tie affair my sister Ivy had been organizing for months. And by organizing, I mean micromanaging every second of it like it were the Oscars. She had chosen Skyline because it was elegant but not tacky, high-end but still respectable. And most importantly, not the kind of place Luna would ever afford. That's what she'd told me on the phone. And I had smiled. Even though my hand clenched around the stem of my wine glass. Because the irony was too rich. Ivy didn't know that I owned Skyline Tower. Not just the event space, the entire building, every floor, every key card, every employee from the valets outside to the executive chef preparing my parents' celebration dinner upstairs. But I didn't tell her that. Not yet. Because some truths are sweeter when they're allowed to reveal themselves. As I stepped toward the front desk, I caught sight of my mother, Karen Blake, standing stiffly in a navy blue silk dress that looked like it had been tailored in the early 2000s. She was holding her purse like it might attack her. She caught sight of me and frowned. "Luna," she said. Quietly, but sharply. "Please don't make a scene tonight." A scene? I blinked. I just walked in the door. "Mom." "Yes." "Well," she said, scanning me from head to toe. Her eyes paused on my black satin heels, my dark emerald dress, the subtle sparkle of my diamond necklace. "Try not to overdress. This isn't about you." It was then that Ivy appeared, tall, blonde, and always camera-ready. Ivy was the one who'd gone to Michigan, married a finance bro, had 2 picture-perfect kids, and lived in a cul-de-sac named something like Maple Glen Estates. She looked at me like I was gum stuck to her Louboutin. "You made it," she said flatly. "Of course I did," I replied. She gave a tight smile. "Wasn't sure, eh? Last time you were supposed to come to Dad's birthday. You had work stuff." "Whatever that means." I smiled politely. "It means I work." Before she could reply, I saw her eyes flicker toward the man who had just entered behind me, Jason Monroe, head of guest services and the man I trusted more than anyone in this building. Dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, earpiece discreetly tucked in. Jason approached me with measured steps. "Miss Blake," he said, with a slight bow of his head. "Everything is prepared as requested." Ivy blinked. "Who is this?" she asked. Jason smiled coolly. "I'm with Skyline Tower. I just needed a brief word with Miss Blake." "Wait," Ivy said, her voice sharpening. "Luna, is something wrong with your reservation? You didn't try to walk in without being on the guest list. Oh, did you?" Before I could answer, my mother hissed, just loud enough for me to hear. "Don't embarrass us. Luna, please. If you're having money issues, We can figure something out later. Quietly, I stood there. In the building I had designed, renovated, financed, and built from the ground up with the very people who had once called my dreams foolish now whispering to me like I was a liability. I glanced at Jason, and he caught my eye, silently asking. Now I gave him the smallest nod. Jason turned toward Ivy and my mother with a calm, clear voice that seemed to still the entire lobby. Mrs. Blake. Miss Ivy. He said, "You may not realize this, but you're currently speaking to the owner of Skyline Tower. Miss Luna Blake is the founder and CEO of Skyline Properties, and this building belongs to her." The silence that followed could have cracked glass. Ivy blinked. "I'm sorry." What? My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. Jason stepped aside and gestured toward the grand staircase that led to the ballroom. "Miss Blake, your family's event is ready in the Horizon Suite. Shall we proceed?" I looked at my mother, then at Ivy. Their expressions a blend of confusion, disbelief, and something dangerously close to fear etched themselves into my memory. Then I smiled. "After you," I said, walking past them without another word. And just like that, the night my family thought would be their moment of glory became mine. I wasn't born to stand out. At least, not in the way my family defined it. Growing up in Savannah, Georgia, our home was a perfectly curated Southern portrait. White columns, magnolia trees, Sunday brunches, and endless polite smiles hiding quiet disapproval. And in that polished world, I was the smudge on the glass. My sister, Ivy, was the golden child from the moment she could walk in heels and bat her lashes. She played violin badly, but nobody said so. She got straight A's, joined the debate team, and dated the captain of the lacrosse team. She was the dream daughter, polished, predictable, perfect. Then there was me, Luna. Messy, curious, quiet. I liked sketchbooks more than cheer practice, silence more than parties. While Ivy was being fitted for cotillion dresses, I was sneaking into bookstores, designing logos in my journals, and learning how to code basic websites on a secondhand laptop I'd bought with babysitting money. At 16, I started an online store that sold handmade journals and stationery. I designed every item myself, packed every order, stayed up until 3 a.m., answering customer emails. I was proud of it. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would be too. But when I showed my first $400 earnings to my mom, her smile was thin and sharp. "That's cute, honey," she said, patting my hand. "But don't let it distract you from real plans. You'll need something stable eventually." And just like that, what felt like the beginning of something for me became a footnote in their eyes. My dad was more reserved, but no better. At dinner, when Ivy announced she wanted to study economics at the University of Michigan, he practically popped champagne. When I told him I wanted to study design and brand strategy, something I had researched endlessly, he cleared his throat and said, "Well, that's different." Different. The word hung like a cloud in our house. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't rude. I didn't party. I didn't date wildly. I didn't make their lives hard. I just wasn't them. And in my family, that was its own kind of sin. Ivy was everything they admired. She followed the rules. She lived in the center of the spotlight. And me, I lived in the margins, sometimes by choice, sometimes because they shoved me there. When senior year rolled around, my parents pulled out all the stops for Ivy's college tour flights, hotel rooms, the works. She applied to 5 Ivy Leagues in Michigan. Her safety. Meanwhile, I applied to Denver School of Design and Innovation, a place they had never heard of and probably still couldn't point to on a map. "You're really doing this?" my mom asked as we sat across from each other in the kitchen one night. "Yes," I said. "I've already started a brand. I want to learn how to build it properly." She stirred her tea like the motion would somehow fix what I'd just said. And what happens if it doesn't work out? That was always her favorite question. What if it fails? Not what if it succeeds. Not how can we support you? Just what if it falls apart? My parents paid every penny of Ivy's education. Full ride tuition, housing, even spending money. Me, I was told I'd learn valuable lessons by paying my own way. So I did. I worked 3 jobs during college: morning barista shifts at a coffee shop, afternoon classes, night receptionist at a co-working space. There were days I didn't eat a real meal. Nights I fell asleep on the bus home. But I never stopped. Because even if they didn't believe in me, I did. There's a kind of resilience that grows in silence. When nobody's clapping for you, you learn to clap for yourself. When nobody's waiting at the finish line, you learn to build your own. And yet, even through the distance, I still craved a moment. One moment of recognition. One moment of, "You've done well, Luna." It never came. When I landed my first freelance contract designing a full brand strategy for a boutique hotel group, I called home to tell them. My dad said, "Well, at least it's something steady. Ivy just got promoted at her firm." By the way, every win of mine was followed by a "but Ivy," so I stopped calling. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I still sent cards on holidays. I still remembered birthdays. I still wired money anonymously to help with a medical bill my mom once complained about on Facebook. But I stopped hoping they'd ever truly see me. I built a quiet, beautiful world outside their view. And slowly, it became enough. Until, of course, the Skyline Tower. It was my biggest project yet. A forgotten 30-story building in downtown Chicago that I saw, not for what it was, but for what it could be. Where others saw outdated walls, I saw potential. I raised capital, hired the right team, and poured myself into every detail: floor plans, scent branding, the lighting that would make guests feel powerful just by stepping inside. And I did it all without a word to my family. Not because I wanted revenge, but because they had already written their version of my story and I was done trying to rewrite it for them. They thought I was a creative with no direction. In truth, I was an empire builder with a vision they could never understand, until the night they unknowingly walked into the very building I owned, thinking it would be too expensive for someone like Luna. And that was the beginning of their education. Denver winters are unforgiving, especially when you're walking to a 5 a.m. shift in worn-out boats. Carrying flashcards for a marketing midterm you'll barely stay awake through. But that was my life at 20, a blur of early shifts, late classes, and nights that ended on the last bus out of downtown. Face pressed against a cold window, mind calculating tips and tuition. While Ivy was pledging a sorority and backpacking Europe with her business ethics class, I was living on instant noodles, freelancing brand kits for $50 a pop, and teaching myself how to use Adobe Suite on a 10-year-old MacBook. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, at the Denver School of Design and Innovation. I was one of the few students who didn't come from money or artistic legacy. No famous architect fathers. No, my mom owns a gallery in Soho. Just me. A second-hand laptop. And a vision I couldn't shake. Some nights I questioned everything. I'd stare at the ceiling of my basement apartment. Hands, numb from working the espresso machine all day. And wonder, am I crazy for thinking this will lead somewhere? That question came loudest when I'd open a message from home. My mother's texts were always efficient. Void of warmth, your sister made partner today. Thought you'd want to know? Or worse, are you still doing that design thing? That thing? Like it was a hobby. Like I was a child coloring outside the lines while Ivy built skyscrapers out of gold. I stopped replying. Because every time I reached out hoping for connection, I got comparison. But in that loneliness, something else formed grit. Met Maya Delane. A professor who taught experiential branding, basically, how places make people feel. She was blunt, sharp, and wore leather jackets like armor. The first time I pitched an idea in her class, she stared at me for a full 5 seconds before saying, "You don't see spaces for what they are. You see them for what they want to be." No one had ever said that to me before. She started inviting me to stay after class. Gave me extra books. Introduced me to former students who had built design firms from scratch. Maya didn't coddle. She challenged. One afternoon, she asked me to rebrand a failing co-working space in downtown Denver on paper. I sketched out everything new name. Vibe. Target demographics. Lighting theory. Scent profile. It wasn't homework. It was obsession. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. She read it in silence, then passed it back. One word scribbled at the bottom, pitch it, and I did. I walked into a room full of skeptical men in Patagonia vests and shook hands with the COO like I belonged there. I showed them my vision not just in slides but in story, how their space could make entrepreneurs feel powerful. Welcome. Grounded. They hired me. Paid me 5 times what I was making in a month at the cafe. That contract turned into 3 more. Word of mouth did what no family favor ever had opened doors. By 23, I was designing spaces across Denver for real estate firms that thought I was some secret weapon. I never told them I was still in school. I just showed up. Delivered. And left before they could ask too many questions. Still, I didn't tell my family. Not even when I bought my first car cash. Not when I moved into a sunlit loft with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. Not even when a Denver business magazine listed me as one of 5 creatives to watch under 25, because deep down, I knew what would happen. They'd say it was a fluke. They'd compare it to Ivy's latest corporate award. Or call it cute. Or remind me that creative careers were risky and unstable. So instead, I kept building. I worked. I saved. I studied. I said no to parties, to dating, and to anything that would distract me from the vision that had become my life's heartbeat. Maya once told me, don't wait for permission to be who you are. People will catch up or they won't. Either way, you'll be too far ahead to care. That stuck with me. By the time I graduated, I had a 6-figure portfolio, a handful of private investors watching me, and a notebook full of building concepts I'd sketched late at night when the city was asleep. My final semester, I took a risk. There was a rundown 30-story office building on the edge of downtown Chicago. Ugly. Forgotten. Tenants had left. The exterior screamed 1987 N.A-id.A.1 Rady-8T. The city was begging anyone to take it. I saw it. And I saw everything it could be, a place where power met elegance. where CEOs and young dreamers would work under skylights and sip espresso from marble cafes. A tower that didn't intimidate, but inspired. I made the pitch. I gathered investors. I showed them the vision. I leveraged every contact I'd made, every win, every sleepless night, and I got it. Skyline Tower. My first acquisition. I closed the deal on my 25th birthday. Alone. Quietly, while my parents sent a card that said, "Hope you're still chasing your little dream." Ivy says, "Hey." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to anymore. I had stopped trying to prove them wrong. I was too busy proving myself right. They called it an eyesore. The Skyline Tower had once been a beacon of downtown Chicago commerce in the late 80s marble lobby. Polished brass elevators, sweeping views of Lake Michigan. But by the time I acquired it, the place looked like a relic of corporate excess cracked tiles, flickering lights, and floors that hadn't seen tenants in years. But where others saw decay, I saw potential. Maybe that's always been my gift. I don't see things as they are, I see what they could become. While the city gave up on the building, I rolled up my sleeves. I didn't just want to renovate it, I wanted to rebirth it. I surrounded myself with people who understood vision, designers who knew how to balance light and intention, engineers who weren't afraid to tear out what didn't work and rebuild from the ground up, and above all, I brought in my secret weapon, Jason Monroe, a former hotelier turned experience consultant. He didn't just think in terms of walls and furniture. He thought in emotion, in how a guest should feel when they walked through a door. Together, we reimagined Skyline. We tore down outdated floors, installed smart climate systems, layered in biophilic design and sensory-driven layouts. Every surface was intentional. Every scent in every corridor was curated. Even the elevator music was replaced with soundscapes tuned to the time of day. And while all this happened, my family had no idea. They still thought I was in Denver, probably freelancing for some design place. Occasionally, I'd get a group text from my mom about Ivy's latest accomplishment, a TEDx talk, a consulting deal, a press feature. I never replied. But that silence didn't mean I wasn't listening. No, it meant I had learned to filter the noise. Instead of fighting to be understood, I focused on building something so undeniable it no longer needed explanation. It took me 18 months to fully relaunch Skyline. 18 months of working 14-hour days, fighting zoning boards, hiring and firing contractors, and maxing out every ounce of my emotional energy. And then, it opened. The city didn't recognize it at first. The exterior had retained its modest corporate silhouette, but inside was a different world. Skyline became a magnet for venture capital firms, creative agencies, and high-growth tech startups. The top 5 floors transformed into the Horizon Club, a private executive lounge and workspace where deals were made over aged whiskey and fresh-baked lavender scones. Every detail whispered luxury but never screamed it. The media noticed. Architectural Digest called it a resurrection of modern grace. Chicago Weekly called me the silent storm shaking up luxury real estate. But the greatest reward wasn't the press. It was walking through my building at 9 p.m. barefoot, holding a cup of chamomile tea, and hearing the quiet hum of life, the laughter echoing from a rooftop dinner, the soft jazz spilling from the speakeasy-style bar on the 27th floor, the feeling that I had created something that mattered. I moved into the penthouse on the 30th floor, one I had designed from scratch, not for status, but because I wanted to wake up inside the thing I had built with my own 2 hands. Still, I told no one. Not my mother. Not my father. Certainly not Ivy. To them, I was still doing something creative in Denver. My name had never been a headline back home in Savannah, and I kept it that way. But sometimes, in moments of stillness, I wondered, why didn't I tell them? I told myself it was because they'd never believed in me, that they didn't deserve to know, that their validation wasn't necessary. And maybe that was true. But another part of me, the quiet, still beating heart beneath the armor, knew the real answer. I didn't tell them because I still remembered how it felt to be laughed at across a dinner table, to be met with silence when I shared my wins, to be told over and over again that my dreams weren't real. So I built Skyline, not for applause, but for freedom, for proof to myself that I wasn't crazy, that I could make something extraordinary from the scraps they'd dismissed. And then, one morning, everything changed. It was a Tuesday. I was sipping espresso in my penthouse office, reviewing design renderings for a boutique hotel project in Seattle with makeipleaseNDT.org. When my assistant, Valerie, knocked. "You're gonna want to see this," she said, holding out her iPad. It was an email thread. My mother, Karen Blake, was planning my parents' 40th anniversary celebration, and she was comparing venues in Chicago. 3 options were listed. Skyline Tower was one of them. I nearly dropped my coffee. The notes she'd made were classic mom elegant, possibly too expensive, don't want Luna to feel out of place. I laughed. Out loud. For the first time in days, Valerie raised an eyebrow. "They don't know, not a clue. You going to tell them I stared at the skyline outside my window?" "My skyline?" "No," I said, smiling. "Not yet." She grinned. "This is gonna be fun." And in that moment, I knew. The reveal wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing off. It was about stepping into my power and letting the truth land exactly when it was meant to. Because sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. And mine was almost over. It was a crisp Saturday in October, and the Skyline Tower gleamed in the sunlight like a secret waiting to be discovered. The 40th wedding anniversary celebration for Karen and David Blake, my parents had finally arrived. And they had unknowingly chosen my building as the venue, not out of sentiment or recognition. Of course. Just because it was modern, but not flashy. As Mom had written in the email thread, exclusive, but tasteful. The irony, it was exactly how I had designed it to feel. They had no idea the moment they stepped through the polished glass doors. They'd be walking into my world. A world I had built stone by stone, detail by detail, without a dime or a drop of support from them. And now, the moment had arrived. I didn't tell them I'd be there. Didn't announce anything. I wanted the truth to hit not with thunder, but with silence. 6:00 p.m. sharp. I stood on the mezzanine balcony, above the main hall, hidden behind a glass panel. Below me, a symphony of silver, gold, and champagne-colored decor glimmered under soft amber lighting. My team had executed every detail flawlessly, just like we always did. Then I saw them walk in. Mom, in a pearl-embroidered dress. Dad, stiff in a tux he probably hadn't worn since Ivy's wedding. Eve, of course, looked like she belonged on a Vogue cover, flawless, polished, self-satisfied. They moved through the lobby with curious glances. "This is stunning," I heard my mother whisper, as she trailed her fingers along the marble banister. "So elegant." My father nodded, visibly impressed. "Didn't expect this kind of detail. Thought it would be more industrial." Ivy turned to the concierge and asked, "Who designed this place, the concierge?" Trained and briefed. smiled. Miss Luna Blake. The silence was instant. My mother's hand froze mid-air. My father blinked like he misheard. Ivy Ever the skeptic actually laughed. You must mean a different Luna Blake. The concierge replied calmly. No. Ma'am. Miss Luna Blake is the founder, lead designer, and majority owner of Skyline. I saw it then, the flicker. That flash of disbelief that quickly bled into something else. Not just surprise. Shame. For the first time, they were standing in a place they couldn't deny was beautiful, successful, and out of their reach, only to realize that the very daughter they had dismissed had created it. I stepped forward. Down the grand staircase. Not slowly. Not dramatically. Just peacefully. The room parted as I walked, like it knew this was a moment years in the making. When I reached the bottom, my mother turned. Her voice trembled. You built this, I nodded. From the ground up. She glanced around as if trying to disprove it. But when how I smiled gently. Well, you were busy reminding me that Ivy had a 401k and a fiancé. I was building a brand, while you were wondering if my design thing would ever pay off. I was signing contracts, renovating, pitching, owning. My dad looked like he'd swallowed glass. Why didn't you tell us? I took a breath. Calm and steady. Because you didn't ask. You never really asked. You assumed I'd fail. So I stopped giving you the chance to witness me rise. Ivy crossed her arms. You were always so dramatic. I turned to her. No. I just refused to live in your shadow. She looked away first. And that was when I knew the power had shifted. Not in arrogance. In truth, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval. I was standing still. And they were the ones catching up. The evening moved on like any other. Guests dined. Laughed. Toasted. My team operated like clockwork. My parents, though, were quieter. Watching. Processing. Swallowing years of assumptions they now realized were wrong. At one point, my mother approached me at the edge of the rooftop terrace, where the city lights painted the sky in gold and violet. She hesitated, then said, You've done something remarkable. I turned to her. Thank you. I didn't know. She added, voice barely above a whisper. I know. Her eyes welled up. And for a second, I saw the girl she once was before pride hardened her edges. We weren't fair to you. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked out at the skyline. My skyline. Then I said, I didn't need fair. I just needed space. And now I have it. She nodded. And I walked away gracefully. Because closure doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes, it's just the moment when the story finally turns in your favor, and you don't feel the need to fight anymore. That night, as the final guests left and the lights dimmed, I stayed in the lobby for a while. Alone. Not lonely. Just whole. The girl they overlooked had become the woman they couldn't ignore. And the empire they couldn't see, now, it towered above them all. The morning after the anniversary party, I stood barefoot in the kitchen of my penthouse, cradling a mug of black coffee and staring out across the city skyline. Everything should have felt perfect. I had revealed the truth on my own terms. I had taken back my voice. And yet, something inside me felt hollow. The silence that had once protected me was now filled with echoes, memories, questions. What ifs? I kept replaying my mother's face, the way her voice cracked when she said, We weren't fair to you. For years. I had dreamed of that moment, not for revenge, but for validation, and now that it had come, it felt quieter than I expected. Softer. Not triumphant. Almost tragic. Because the truth is, no one wins in a family where love is transactional. Later that afternoon, I got a message from Dad. Just 4 words. Can we talk sometime? It was the first time in a decade he'd reached out to me directly. No group texts. No awkward forwarded links to Ivy's LinkedIn articles. Just him. Asking. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I replied, "Come by tomorrow." 11 a.m. I cleaned the living room that night not because it was messy, but because my hands needed something to do. I adjusted pillows. Polished surfaces that didn't need polishing. Lit candles that smelled like cedar and citrus. And the next day, at exactly 11:00, he rang. When I opened the door, he stood there looking. Smaller, not physically, but in presence. His tea was crooked. His eyes tired. I gestured for him to come in. And he stepped across the threshold like he wasn't sure he deserved to end of D20 Deschen meter. For a moment, he just looked around. This place is... He trailed off. I waited. He cleared his throat. It's beautiful. Luna. Thank you. We sat. Awkward silence filled the space between us like fog. Then he said, "I don't know what to say." You don't have to say anything. But I think we both knew that wasn't true. I didn't believe in what you were doing. He said finally, "I thought you were being reckless. Idealistic. Chasing something that would burn out?" I know. He looked up. And when you kept proving us wrong, we didn't know how to respond. So we just ignored it. I swallowed hard. That hurt. I said. Not because I needed your approval, but because I wanted your presence. I wanted you to show up. To say you were proud. To ask questions, even if you didn't understand. I just wanted you to care. His face crumpled. And then, for the first time in my life, I saw tears in my father's eyes. I was scared. He said, "You were always so different from Ivy. I knew how to encourage her grades. Promotions. Trophies. You were this storm I didn't know how to guide." A lump rose in my throat. You didn't have to guide me. I whispered. Just walk beside me. He nodded slowly. I see that now. There was a long silence. Then he stood and walked to the window. When I walked into this building yesterday, I thought I was coming to a party. I didn't realize I was walking into the world you built. And I felt ashamed. I didn't know my own daughter. I still don't. You can. I said. He turned to me. If you'll let me. Something cracked inside me. A wall I didn't even know was still standing. I nodded. He smiled. It was small, but real. And just like that, we began again. Not perfectly, but truthfully. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from Ivy. Mom's been crying all day. Dad said you met. I guess I owe you congratulations. You really did it. I stared at the message for a long time. Then typed, I'm not looking for congratulations. Just honesty? She didn't reply that night. But the next morning, she called. I don't know how to talk to you anymore. She said, you can start by not competing. There was a pause. I don't know who I am without that. That's your work to do. I said gently. And for once, she didn't argue. We talked for an hour. Not about awards. Not about careers. About us. About the childhood we both survived. The silent expectations. The pressure to be pleasing. I learned things I never knew about her. About how even in her so-called perfect life, she felt invisible too. And in that conversation, a strange tenderness bloomed. We weren't healed, but we were no longer pretending, and that, to me, was everything. That week, I took a break from meetings. I spent more time walking through Skyline not as a CEO, but as a witness, watching tenants laugh in lounges I designed, sipping coffee in cafe I curated, pitching ideas in rooms I once dreamed of from a basement apartment in Denver. This was mine. All of it. Built not from vengeance, but from vision. Not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove that I could rise without permission. And now, with the silence broken, something even more powerful had taken root. Peace. It started with a whisper. A casual suggestion at the Horizon Club rooftop one evening, as the city shimmered below, and the jazz quartet played something soft and aching in the background. You ever think about L. Azamer? Asked Jason Monroe, my experience consultant, and by now, my closest confidant. I looked at him over the rim of my glass. Not really. Why? He leaned back in his chair, watching the skyline like a chessboard. Because the West Coast doesn't have anything like this. You brought soul back into real estate. You didn't just design a building, you designed emotion. And that's rare. I smiled, but said nothing, because I had thought about it. About New York. About San Francisco. About London. But the idea of replicating Skyline always felt dangerous. What I built here came from heartbreak, hunger, rejection, and rage. Could I summon that storm again in a new city without tearing myself apart? Still, the seed was planted. Within 3 weeks, I was on a flight to Los Angeles. The city greeted me like an old flame, beautiful but unpredictable. The skyline wasn't as vertical, but the energy buzzed with ambition. I visited old Art Deco buildings downtown, walked through abandoned warehouses in the Arts District, and toured the skeleton of a half-finished boutique hotel in Echo Park. And then I saw it, an old mid-century corporate campus just off Mulholland Drive. 5 low-rise buildings spread across 12 acres, empty for a decade. But the bones were good. Jason flew in to walk the site with me. Luna, he whispered, standing in the middle of the overgrown courtyard. This could be your legacy. That word hit different. Legacy. Not revenge. Not escape. Legacy. The next 3 months blurred into a tornado of paperwork, zoning meetings, and capital restructuring. I pulled in investors, but quietly, I didn't want this to become about shareholders. I wanted autonomy. We called it the Haven Project. Not a building. A sanctuary. For thinkers, creators, founders, artists. A place where architecture met emotion. Where nature wasn't pushed out, it was invited in. It became my obsession. I was flying back and forth between Chicago and L.A. weekly. Emails at midnight. Design revisions on the plane. Voice notes while walking through demolition sites. I was chasing a vision I could see with painful clarity. But somewhere in all that motion, I started to lose myself. I stopped journaling. Stopped meditating. My meals became protein bars and caffeine. My sleep thin and restless. Even the penthouse I once adored felt like a museum exhibit. Beautiful, but cold. One night, Jason pulled me aside. "You need to breathe," he said gently. "I'm fine." "No? You're functioning. There's a difference." I knew he was right, but when you've built your identity on surviving, slowing down feels like failure. Still, it got harder to ignore. I missed my dad's birthday dinner. I forgot to reply to Ivy's message about Mom's test results. Nothing serious. But still. She noticed. Even my staff began asking, "Are you okay more than once a week?" I told them yes. Always yes. But the truth, I was tired. Not physically. Existentially. Because building something beautiful is one thing. Maintaining it while growing something bigger, that's a different beast. The weight grows heavier. The spotlight brighter. And suddenly, you realize that your dream has teeth. And it bites. One night in L.A., I stood alone on the roof of the Haven site now, just a framework of beams and scaffolding. The city below twinkled like a promise. But I felt detached. Like I was floating above my life. I thought about Denver, about that cramped studio apartment where I once cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd ever be seen. And now I was everywhere. Magazine covers. Podcasts. Panel invites. Investors whispering my name in rooms I'd never entered. And still, I felt invisible in the one place that mattered most. Inside myself. That's when I knew something had to change. I didn't want to build another empire if I couldn't live inside it. I didn't want my legacy to be a collection of stunning structures with no emotional foundation. I didn't want to become the very thing I escaped from: cold, distant, unreachable. So I made a decision. One that would scare my board, shock my team, and confuse the media. But one that would save my soul. I would take a step back. Not quit. Not disappear. Just pause. Let someone else drive for a while. Let myself remember why I built in the first place. Because the world doesn't need another tower. It needs truth. It needs places made by people who are alive, not just impressive. And so, I walked into my office the next morning. I gathered my team. And I said, with steady breath and clear eyes, I'm going on a sabbatical. 3 months. Maybe 6. Jason will run point. The Haven will continue. But I need to come back to myself. Because if I don't, none of this means anything. They were stunned. But they understood. And as I walked out of that office, for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I'd let go of power, but because I'd chosen presence. And that, I realized, might be the most radical act of all. The first few days felt like falling. Not the kind of falling you brace for, but the slow, spiraling kind, where you're not sure if you're floating or drifting away. No meetings. No deadlines. No skyline. Just stillness. I had rented a small cabin in the Pacific Northwest. No internet. No reception unless I hiked a mile toward the main road. Just me. A fireplace. And trees, so tall they looked like gods. The silence was deafening at first. I didn't know what to do with my hands. My mind kept trying to problem solve. To plan. To build something. I would instinctively reach for my phone every 10 minutes. Only to remember I had left it turned off in a drawer. I was detoxing from ambition. And let me tell you, it hurts. For years. My worth had been tied to performance. Success wasn't a celebration, it was a shield. A way to protect myself from the memory of being unseen. But out here, there was no one to impress. The forest didn't care who I was. And slowly, that became a gift. I began each day with coffee on the porch. watching the morning mist weave between the trees. I started sketching again, not for a project, not for profit, just for joy. I read poetry. I napped. I cooked simple meals. And for the first time in what felt like years, I breathed without a weight on my chest. Then, on the 12th day, I met him. His name was Wes. He was hiking the trail behind my cabin when he noticed smoke coming from my chimney and asked if I had an axe he could borrow. His had broken on a pine root. I almost laughed. No one had asked me for anything simple in years. I gave him the axe, and he thanked me with a thermos of homemade chai tea. He was staying 2 miles up the trail, in a converted A-frame he'd built himself. Forma marine. Turned high school art teacher. Said he came out here every fall to reset. I liked that word. Reset. Over the next few weeks, we crossed paths often. He'd show up with fresh herbs from his garden. I'd bake cornbread and leave it by his trail marker. We barely spoke at first, just smiles. Small nods. Waves across tree lines. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the evergreens, he knocked. I built a fire. Thought maybe you'd want to join. We sat outside, wrapped in wool blankets, sipping from chipped mugs. He didn't ask about my business or my buildings. He asked, "What makes you feel alive?" I didn't know how to answer. I used to think it was achievement. I finally said, "Now I'm not so sure." He nodded. Sometimes it's just this. You know, firelight, cold air, and someone who's not trying to fix you. That night, we didn't kiss. We didn't even touch. But something shifted in me. A different kind of intimacy. One built on presence rather than performance. In the days that followed, we shared more stories. About the time he almost drowned as a kid and how it taught him to stop fighting the current. About my mother's silence and how it shaped the way I craved applause. He didn't offer solutions. He just listened. And in doing so, he gave me the space to hear my own voice again. I told him about the haven, about the pressure, the perfection, the pause. He smiled. Maybe it's not a pause. He said, maybe it's a pivot. That word stayed with me. Pivot. Not abandoning the path but shifting direction. Choosing to walk it differently. The day before I was set to leave, Wes gave me a small wooden box. Inside was a carved stone. Smooth. Warm. Weathered by time. Found this in a riverbed years ago. He said, held onto it through 3 deployments. Figured it might belong to someone else now. I held it in my palm and felt something release. A soft exhale from my soul. We didn't make promises. Didn't exchange dramatic goodbyes. We just hugged for a long time. No words. And then I left. Back to the city. Back to the noise. But this time, I brought the silence with me. The kind that doesn't scream for attention but anchors you, Rextane, that grounds you. When I returned to Chicago, Jason greeted me with updates. Papers. Timelines. But before I touched any of it, I walked straight into the skyline atrium, stood beneath the chandelier I had once agonized over, and closed my eyes. Then I whispered, I'm still here. Not the CEO. Not the brand. Just Luna. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. When I walked back into the Skyline headquarters, something felt different. It wasn't the architecture still pristine. It wasn't the staff, they stood straighter when I entered. Their eyes scanning for signs of the old Luna. It was me. I had returned not as a woman seeking to conquer, but as a woman ready to create again. but this time with soul. Jason greeted me in the boardroom, flipping through a binder of new proposals, forecasts, and potential expansions. I raised a hand gently. Pause. I said, "Before we go there, can I ask you something?" He looked up. Curious. Of course. What if we stopped chasing growth and started nurturing depth? He tilted his head. Go on. I took a deep breath. What if our next chapter wasn't about how far we can stretch, but how deeply we can serve? What if Skyline became a movement, not a monument? Jason leaned back in his chair, a slow smile forming. I've been waiting for you to say that. That's when I realized he'd been carrying the weight while I was away, not just the logistics, but the soul of the thing, protecting it until I was strong enough to return. So, we began again. We restructured the leadership model, less hierarchy, more trust. We opened creative studios inside our spaces where young artists, especially from underserved communities, could work rent-free. We reimagined the use of our rooftops not just as luxury terraces, but as urban gardens to feed local shelters. And we stopped talking about clients. We talked about people, because the truth is, architecture is not about steel and glass. It's about story. Each room tells one my place and our www. Each corridor carries whispers. Each window frames a choice. And I was finally ready to choose differently. 2 months after my return, we launched a mentorship program pairing young women in architecture and design with our team. One day, after a roundtable workshop, a girl named Sasha, no older than 21, approached me. She was nervous, but her eyes held fire. I want to build places like you, she said. Places that feel, not just look good, feel good. I smiled. Then you're already ahead of where I started. She laughed. I doubt that. No. I said, you are? Because you're beginning from emotion, not ego. She looked at me for a long time. Thank you, she said softly. Not for the program. For being visible. I didn't know women like you existed. Her words stopped me cold, because I had once been her searching for someone who looked like a possibility, and now, here I was. Someone else's proof. After Sasha left, I sat alone in the atrium, staring at the floor-to-ceiling mural that had once been a controversial addition. Back then, the board had called it unconventional. Too expressive. Not corporate enough. But I had insisted, because it told the truth. And now it had become the most photographed corner of Skyline, a symbol of feelings made visible. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in weeks. I am not just building for beauty. I am building for belonging. And just as I finished that sentence, my phone buzzed. A text. From Wes. Hey, just thinking about that night by the fire? Hope you're still breathing deep. I stared at the message, then typed, I am more than ever. Come visit, he replied almost instantly, already packing. 3 days later, Wes arrived in Chicago. We walked through Skyline's winter garden, hand in hand. I introduced him to Jason, to Sasha, to the janitor who'd been with us since day one. And as we stood in the lounge where it had all begun, Wes turned to me. This place, he said, is alive. I smiled. So am I. We didn't make declarations. No fairy tale endings. Just truth. Just presence. And the quiet understanding that home wasn't a place, it was a state of being. I had once believed success meant being untouchable. Now, I knew the real magic was in being reachable. In building not just with brilliance, but with heart. So as the snow began to fall outside, and the city lights blinked like distant constellations, I stood at the top of the skyline building, wrapped in a simple coat. Vest beside me. I thought about all the versions of me that had stood here before. The scared girl, the angry woman, the silent fighter. And now, just Luna. Whole. Soft. Still rising. But no longer alone. No longer performing. Just breathing. And finally, home. The room was silent, except for the sound of soft breaths and the gentle hum of a projector warming up. It was the 10-year anniversary of Skyline. We had gathered not in a ballroom or a hotel, but in the heart of the building, the atrium where it all began. No gold decorations. No grand speeches. Just people, stories, and light. I stood off to the side, watching them arrive. Jason, now my co-CEO. Calm. Wise. Steady. Sasha graduated. Licensed. And recently awarded her first solo project. My father finally at peace with the life I built. Holding my hand instead of holding back. And Wes quiet in a gray wool blazer, with that same fire-warmed smile he'd given me in the woods. Someone dimmed the lights. The short film began. It wasn't a promotional piece. No flashy edits. No stock music. Just real stories. Residents of Skyline who spoke about how living there made them feel safe. Artists who painted murals on our walls. Single moms who got hired as administrators and rose through the ranks. Teens who attended our mentorship sessions and saw their futures shift. One girl, no older than 16, looked into the camera and said, "I used to walk by this building and think it wasn't for people like me. Now I walk through it like it belongs to me. Because it does." That's when the tears came. Not dramatic sobs. Just quiet. Undeniable warmth behind the eyes. Because this was what I had always wanted. Not applause. Not power. But impact. After the video ended, everyone turned toward me. I hadn't prepared a speech. I just stepped forward and let my truth lead. "Hi," I said softly. "My name is Luna. And this isn't my building anymore. It's ours." A pause? 10 years ago. I was broken. I came to this city with nothing but bruised dreams and a fire I didn't know how to use. I wanted to build something the world couldn't ignore. Something that would prove I was worthy. I looked around the room, my eyes meeting faces that now felt like home. But over time, I realized something. We don't need to build towers to be seen. We need to build bridges. Bridges between generations, between art and function, between pain and purpose. I took a breath. And if I've learned anything in this decade, it's this: success without soul is just noise. And legacy without love is just architecture. A long silence followed. Then the applause came. Not explosiva, but real. The kind that wraps around you like a hug. After the event, people lingered. Some wanted to share memories. Some just wanted to stand in the space and feel what we'd created. I stepped outside into the snowy night with Wes, pulling my coat tighter around me. He took my hand. "You did it." "Luna." I shook my head. "We did it." A few weeks later, I made another decision. I officially handed over day-to-day operations to Jason. I wasn't walking away. I was stepping aside to make space for new voices, new visions. I spent more time teaching, speaking, mentoring. I worked with design schools to create a fellowship for young women of color in architecture. One of my proudest days was seeing Sasha accept her role as creative director of the Haven project in L.A. She called me before her first pitch meeting and said, "I'm scared." I laughed. "Good. That means you care?" And she crushed it. Now when I walk through Skyline, I'm often a stranger to new residents. And that's exactly how it should be. Because it means the space no longer needs me to hold it up. It stands on its own. On stories. On hearts. On purpose. A few months later, I returned to the cabin where everything had shifted. The trees were taller. The porch creaked a little more. Inside, I found the small wooden box Wes had given me, still resting on the shelf. I opened it and held the stone again. Weathered. Solid. Quiet. It reminded me of myself. Of how we all get shaped by pressure, by time, by pain. But in the end, we become something smooth. Something strong. Something worth holding on to. As I sat by the fire, journal in my lap, I wrote a single line: legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we set in motion while we're still here. And with that, I closed the book, looked up at the stars, and smiled. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't proving anything. I was just living. Fully. Freely. Finally. Me.